Hey guys, welcome to this week's episode of the Coffee Course. Today we're going to be doing cold brew. We're recording this at home because we're on lockdown, so stay at home. So first off, what is cold brew? It's an immersion method. It's not iced coffee. It's not hot coffee that's been made cold. It's a completely separate thing. It's an immersion method, steeping coffee to extract as much as possible from it. This can be done over a short or long period of time. You're going to get a very different flavor profile. It's going to be far more sweet, less acidic, it's going to be nutty, it's going to be smooth. Personally, I really like cold brew. There's a lot of bad cold brew out there, so I'm going to show you a simple, straightforward method to make it that's fairly foolproof. When you're talking about the amount of caffeine that's in cold brew, people get confused by this. A standard 36ml, which is a double espresso shot, has 70 to 80 milligrams of caffeine. Now, you got to remember that then gets diluted into an Americano or a latte, so you end up with a 10, maybe 12 ounce cup of coffee that has that volume. When you're making cold brew, that's an entirely different thing. You could make it as a concentrate, you could make it as a straight up shot. Some people may water it down, some people may add ice. For the method that we're making today, I like to make my cold brew available as is, not needing to be watered down. So for an 8 to 10 ounce cup, you're talking anywhere between 200 to 300 milligrams of caffeine. So that's pretty powerful stuff. So the choice really does become, do you brew it as concentrate or do you not? Brew ratios, I like to go with about 110 grams of ground coffee to a litre of water if you're not diluting. Or if you do want to dilute that, it's then 165 grams to 1 litre of water. This is all very contingent on how you steep your coffee, how long you steep your coffee, whether you do a thing called a hot bloom, which we'll talk about later on. Patience is required, minimum of 8 hours. I like to go for 24. Grind size, we all know by now, quality grinder. Going similar to French press, similar to V60, we're going for a medium ground coffee. What bean should you use for your cold brew? Again, particular taste. Some people prefer a more traditional medium roast coffee for this. They want to get that chocolatey, that toffee note. Me personally, I actually prefer to bring out that sweetness and the floral notes out of other coffees. So today, we're going to be using Eduardo Campos from Peru, made by Calendar Coffee in Barna, our house roasters as always. Red berries and rose, that's what we're going for here, and I think when you get that in a cold brew, it's going to be particularly good. Okay, let's talk about equipment. It's nice if you have a dedicated cold brewer, but you don't necessarily need it. We'll touch on that at the end, but for now I'm going to show you what I use. This particular system, very straightforward, makes 1 litre of concentrate. It's very easy. You have a dedicated filter in the side. All you need to do is add your ground coffee and then gradually add on cold filtered water, similar to as if you were pouring into a V60 or other filter system. So let's take our medium ground coffee, similar to French press, and get it all into there. As I mentioned, this is great, this particular system. It's actually reasonably priced. You can pick up something like this for 25, 35 euros. It might be good to have 2 of them because the process itself takes so long that it's good to have one cold brew ready to drink and another one on the go. But if you don't have that option, you could use a French press. You will get a little bit more murky quality to it, but again, if you filter it at the end, it's going to be relatively the same. You could use any sort of vessel in which you can steep coffee. You could use what they call a coffee sock or any other filter. In fact, if you really wanted to, you could just use a bowl and steep the coffee, but you're going to be putting a lot of work on yourself afterwards to filter all that out. So, ratios, as we mentioned, I like to use 110 grams to 1 litre. That's what we have in here now. And we're going to gradually and patiently add our cold filtered water in on top of this. So as I mentioned, this process itself does take a bit of time. You'll be surprised by how quickly you'll start to see initial extraction happening. There is a slight color quality to the liquid that's already coming through. I think this is maybe where some people go wrong. They don't be particularly patient when they're making their cold brew, so they may think that, you know, a couple of hours will get you the extraction you want. For me, as I said, minimum 24 hours, and this is going to be going into a fridge. That will slow down the extraction somewhat, but I do think it gives you a chance to get every single good note out of that coffee and make a really sweet quality cold brew. Now there is an option for this. You could water it down, you could put some ice in. I wouldn't put a large volume of that because it will take away from the flavor. Other people will make a really strong, powerful concentrate of cold brew for this purpose and then be able to get more out of it. I think that in some way takes away from the flavor. So as we finish topping this off, just bear that in mind. Numbers aren't always equal and not all cold brew is created equal. You'll be surprised by how slow it becomes towards the end. You have to remember, if you're used to making filtered coffee, you're talking about a process where you're adding hot liquid, and that gives it more chance to channel through. So for this, you'll often think you've got to the top and it won't extract anymore. Give it a minute, let it drain through, and then add it again. You have to remember you're going to be waiting 24 hours for this anyway, so it will take a while. Once this is topped off, it's very straightforward. Make sure that all the grounds are wet. If there's anything left inside that isn't in contact, push it down into the liquid, and don't be afraid to give it a little bit of a stir to make sure that's all in contact. From here, it's very simple, guys. You pop that lid on, you wait 24 hours, and then we come back tomorrow to filter it off. So as I mentioned at the start, you could do this with a French press. You will have more grounds swimming around, more particulate in here. There's more steps to filter it out. You could use a coffee sock. You could use any sort of container where you can steep your coffee grounds, as long as you're going to be able to remove the liquid and strain it off afterwards. There's a whole bunch of other methods of coffee brew and cold method. There's the ice cold drip, there's the Japanese cold brew, and then there's also what's referred to as the hot bloom. So the hot bloom would be similar to this, except for you would actually take approximately 25-30% of the initial liquid and add it at the same temperature as you would a V60 or a Chemex, whatever it may be, to extract more of that traditional filter coffee flavor, and then top off with cold water as well. This is going to be very much down to personal preference. The joy of cold brew is you could be making this for weeks, and there's so many varieties you could make. You could end up with totally different animals. But once you do find the one you like, write down what worked for you. That is the key. Okay, so before I disappear for 24 hours and then magically come back onto your screen in a couple of seconds, we've often talked about grinders in the show and quality home grinders. This particular one, my wonderful wife picked up for me a few weeks ago. This is the Wilfa Svart. This is really reasonably priced. It's about 100 to 120 euros. This will cover all your needs, from mocha pot, which is really fine and probably as fine as you should work with at home unless you have a dedicated machine, all the way up to the coarsest of grinds. I've had this a few weeks now and it is absolute quality. I'm not paid by Wilfa, but it's quiet, it's efficient, it's good, and if you want to improve your coffee brewing technique at home outside of having good quality water, this is the absolute must for you. Okay, so we're back. We've waited 24 hours with this vessel in the fridge, gave it an occasional stir once in a while, nothing too aggressive, just to get the most out of it, and now we're actually ready to filter it out. So again, you can use whatever you have at hand. I like to use the V60 papers. It takes a bit more time, but it gives a really good clean out to it. You could use a muslin cloth or any other straining cloth like that. Again, this is all about a bit of patience at this stage, and then deciding what vessel you're going to put it in afterwards. You have to remember that there's going to be a lot of sediment settled at the bottom of this, so what you can do as well if you want to get the most out of it is throw it in the freezer for a couple of minutes before you go to clear it out, and that'll really make it all drop to the very bottom. So turn your vessel to the side, and no more than when you're doing your French press, this is about being slow and delicate and careful at this process. Now you can probably see at this stage it doesn't look particularly dark, but what we will do is we'll pour off a little bit of it first and let that strain through just to get the process going, and then, just so we won't make a mess, we're going to remove our filter now. So again, disturbing the vessel as little as possible during this process. You can start to see the liquid come through in our vessel. Delicate, delicate, delicate. Don't just dump this out straight away. There is a little bit of good quality coffee in here that needs to be extracted. Give it that few seconds to drip. That's the bit that's been in contact for the longest, so it's going to be the most potent. And again, remembering that this is going to be diluted across the whole body of the coffee, so you want to get as much out of it as you can. have a bowl to hand. Don't make a mess on the white table like I did. And again, screw this back on nice and gently. So the first part of that is almost passed through now, so we're going to top up some more. So pouring it through, you'll be able to see it looks quite light in colour, but you will get darker parts of the coffee as you get down to the base of it. And we're just going to be slow and steady and consistent with this. So with this, you are going to see some of the oils in the coffee and other bits of particulate and whatever. That's fine, don't worry about it. The filter will do a good job of taking all that out. And the trick with this is, because it's cold and you're not filtering through hot, you have to top it up quite a lot to get the pressure of the water to push through. But don't be too aggressive in your pour. If you look at the back end of the vessel here, you can see quite darker parts of the coffee. That's where a lot of the sediment is sitting. So try and keep a steady flow, slowly tilting the jug forward, getting the coffee in there in a regular stream without dragging too much of the sediment at the back end through. This will take a bit of a while, so we'll come back to you in a minute. So one of the other reasons that we leave this filter aside like this is, as you can see there, that's a particularly strong concentrate of brew that's dripping out of that. Leave it there for a while, and then you can actually pop it back in through the filter once it's clean. Or what's actually good to do sometimes as well is that you can pop this filter out after 8 hours, 16 hours, whatever it might be. And you can give it a try, just let a little bit out like this into a plate, and you're getting a fairly good estimate of the kind of extraction you're getting. Some people like it a bit sweeter, some people like it a bit smoother. There's all sorts of things you can do. You can add a couple of grams of sugar to bring out more sweetness. You could even actually add a bit of apple cider vinegar, some people say, to balance out acidity as well. Again, personal preference. There's so many options with this, as we'll discuss with Tom later on. But this is pure liquid gold right here. Okay. So again, pouring off the last of this, you do require a bit of patience. You could stir if you want. It's not like it's a hot brew where stirring is going to impact in any way the extraction at this stage. I tend to leave about that much. It seems like you're wasting a lot, but once you get past here, you're going to put a lot of sediment in here, and unless you have a lot of time in your hands, you're going to be waiting for a very long time for that to filter through. So, come back to us in a couple of minutes. What's really interesting is sometimes you'll take a bean that you may be used to and you think might not be a good fit for cold brew, and you're going to get a completely different quality from it. Maybe not one that it was roasted for or one that you expected from it, but it can be really surprising. We just tried a little taste of this. Absolute nutty note coming through is absolutely brilliant. Good sampling plate right here. That'll be going back in there in a couple of minutes. Okay, so we've waited a few minutes. We've got a hefty amount of cold brew in our vessel right here. The last bit can take quite a while to travel through. You can leave it aside on another container like this, and if you have the time and patience, wait for it there. You're going to see nice striated levels of sediment built on the inside of that filter when it's done. As we mentioned earlier on, you can stir it through if you want as well, but right at the end it is going to take a bit of time. This is where muslin does have a bit of an advantage. It will pass through a little bit better, you'll get a bit more sediment. It's down to you depending on how you want to do it. If you're coming over from French press, as we mentioned, which is an option of a way to brew it, you might consider double layers of filtration for that. I'm going to let that build up there. We're going to try our absolutely magic bit of liquid gold here, see how it is. This will have a little bit of sediment. I don't mind that. It's going to be mixed through a lot of the other coffee. Again, with this, as you can see, look at the color quality of that. That's absolutely fantastic. With this, mix it back in. It's only a tiny bit of sediment in maybe like 800 mils up to a litre of coffee. It's not hot brew, once again. You might have those habits of having to swirl your Chemex, your V60. It's not really going to make any difference because you're not going to drink all this in one go. It's going to settle down once again. Some people would advocate another filtration, and you can, but there'll come a point where the benefit of that is gone as you're getting rid of some of the quality of the coffee itself. So let's see. Yeah, that's so good. Okay, now let's go talk with Tom. Okay, so that was cold brew. Tom, thanks for joining me on the phone since we can't do this in person. What are your thoughts on cold brew?
I really enjoyed that video, Jeff. I must admit I've never done cold brew before. I've only seen it being done, and I've had the pleasure of tasting it in coffee shops, and I learned a lot from that. It seems like there's a lot of methods, and the method you used was really good given the coffee you were using. Can you take us through some of the advantages and disadvantages and maybe other methods of brewing coffee cold as well?
Yeah, of course, absolutely. So that particular method that I used, I find it's easy, it's consistent. You can find something you like and reproduce it fairly easily and fairly quickly. Some of the other methods I mentioned, the hot bloom method, you add a small portion of hot water at the same temperature as a V60 or Chemex at the start. Gives you a different flavor quality, gives you a bit more of that traditional filter quality that's then mixed with cold brew. We also mentioned the Japanese iced coffee. So that's, if you can imagine, you're basically making a V60 or a Chemex onto ice, but you have to remember to subtract the quantity of ice from the overall brew ratio and volume. The one I've been particularly impressed with in the past is the ice drip coffee. So that's a little bit different. It's not quite an immersion method. You have a vessel of liquid dropping through a filter of coffee that then goes straight into the final serving vessel. So while it still takes some time to travel through, it's not in contact with a long time, and it generates this coffee that is in some ways similar to the smell you actually get from a coffee bean, which is something people are always looking for, but it's very hard to get in hot coffee. So if you can imagine drinking a cold coffee that actually tastes like a bean smells, that's the experience you're getting there.
Then Jeff, in terms of the taste, maybe a little bit about the mouth feel, maybe about the acidity. Can you tell us a little bit of how the coffee came out, how it tasted?
Yeah, no, for sure. It was very, very smooth. The filter process, as you saw, takes a good while, so it does give a really clean coffee. So the mouthfeel is really clean. It wouldn't have a huge amount of body, but it does have a slight textured quality to it. You're going to get less acidity, more nutty notes. It gets a particular note of sweetness as well that works very well with coffee. That's why some people might like to add a small portion of sugar to the brew. It depends on your own taste.
One other question, for somebody who has never done it before, in terms of grind size, then just to reiterate, what kind of grind size am I looking for cold brew, Jeff?
Yeah, so again, medium ground, similar to V60 or French press. Now, it's a bit more forgiving in here. Again, it's a much longer process. It's not like a 25-30 second shot of espresso that you need to be as concerned about. You can use other grind sizes, but the reason I've used that is it can be consistent. If you grind too fine, you're going to end up with stuff clumping. Too rough, you're not going to have enough in contact. But again, that's not as vastly important as with other brew methods because you're working across such a long period of time. So maybe just dial in on that first. Pick your medium ground, similar to your French press, as I said. So then you know the variations, you can go from there. And then once you've met it a few times, you're comfortable, you could experiment a bit more with different grind sizes.
Yeah, like you said, it's in espresso, you've got your maximum 50 seconds maybe of brewing time, but with this you've got what you were brewing with was it 12 hours, wasn't it, for this?
With this particular one, I went 24, which is my kind of preference. You want to do a minimum of 8, and even at that, I wouldn't bother at 8. I mean, 8 hours in is normally where I'd give it the first kind of stir, which is something I probably should have mentioned in the episode. You can give the coffee a bit of a stir over the course of that 24 hours. There will be a point beyond which you're not going to get much extra. Some people might go up to 48 hours. All you're really getting there is more strength in caffeine. It can be really powerful at that stage, but it won't really impact the flavour a whole lot.
I think that's about sums it up for this episode. This is our 5th episode, is it, Jeff?
This is our 5th episode, and it's a pity we couldn't do it in person, but we're going to try and keep making the content while we can in this way. So if anyone has any questions and wants to get in touch, they can message us through the coffee course, or they can get me, Jeff, and Treebark Store.
Or me, Tom Hayes from Pangea Coffee Culture. Lastly, Jeff, I just want to say thanks. I know I couldn't be here this week with you, but I could nearly smell and taste it from the video, and I know I'm just going to be diving right into cold brew this week now that I have a bit of time off. So thanks very much for taking us through it.
Yeah, great. So we can have a chat in the next episode and see how you get on.